You can sit over there. This table's for actual family." My nephew sneered, gesturing toward a stool by the restroom. Everyone chuckled while I ate in silence. Then the cake, catering, and venue invoice landed, $4,200. The planner approached me. I just sipped my drink and announced, "Ask the actual family." I, 32M, had been the family's go-to guy for years. The reliable uncle who showed up with gifts, picked up dinner tabs, and somehow always ended up footing the bill for family gatherings. My sister's eldest son had always been entitled, but I figured he'd grow out of it. I was wrong. The birthday party started like any other family event. My nephew had turned 25, fresh out of college with his first real job, and apparently that came with a newfound sense of superiority. When I arrived at the upscale restaurant he'd chosen, I noticed the carefully arranged seating chart. Extended family filled the main table, while I found myself directed to a small stool positioned uncomfortably close to the restroom doors. My nephew approached me with that smirk I'd grown to recognize over the years. He gestured dismissively toward my assigned spot and told me I could sit over there, since this table was reserved for actual family. The words hit harder than I expected. Around us, cousins and relatives chuckled nervously, some looking down at their phones to avoid the awkwardness. My sister shot me an apologetic look, but said nothing. I took my seat without protest. Years of keeping the peace had trained me well. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed around the main table while I sat isolated, mechanically eating my overpriced salmon. The restaurant buzzed with activity, servers weaving between tables, but I felt completely alone despite being surrounded by people who shared my blood. The evening progressed with toasts and laughter that seemed to echo from a different world. My nephew basked in the attention, regaling everyone with stories about his new corporate job and his ambitious 5-year plan. He spoke about family values and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly mattered. Each word felt like another small cut. What he didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I had received a call from the event planner. My sister had given them my contact information as the financial guarantor for the party. The total cost came to $4,200, venue rental, premium catering package, custom cake, decorations, and service charges. I had agreed to cover it as my gift to my nephew, thinking it would be a nice surprise for the family. As dessert was served, I watched my nephew blow out 25 candles while everyone cheered. The custom 3-tier cake alone had cost $600. The photographer captured every moment. The hired DJ kept the energy high, and the premium open bar ensured everyone's glasses stayed full. It was exactly the kind of celebration a young man dreams of. My phone buzzed with a text from the event coordinator asking about final payment arrangements. The remaining balance needed to be settled before the night ended. I had planned to handle it quietly, the same way I'd handled countless other family expenses over the years. But something about sitting on that stool, listening to my nephew's speech about actual family, made me reconsider. The planner approached our area, tablet in hand, looking for me to process the final payment. She seemed surprised to find me sitting away from the main celebration, but professional courtesy kept her focused on business. She began explaining the breakdown of charges and asked how I wanted to handle the transaction. That's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. I looked at her calmly, took a slow sip of my whiskey, and told her she should ask the actual family about payment. My voice carried just enough to reach the main table. Conversations began to quiet as people turned to see what was happening. The planner looked confused. She explained that my contact information was on file as the responsible party. I nodded and repeated that she should definitely speak with the actual family, since I was apparently not part of that group. The silence spread across the restaurant section like ripples in a pond. My nephew's face went through several color changes as the reality sank in. His girlfriend grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. My sister finally spoke up, asking what was going on. The planner, now thoroughly uncomfortable, explained that someone needed to settle the outstanding balance of $4,200 before the venue could release the party. The transformation in my nephew's demeanor was immediate and complete. Gone was the confident young professional. In his place sat a panicked kid who had just realized his celebration might end with police involvement. He approached me with a completely different tone, asking if we could talk privately. I remained seated on my stool and suggested he speak openly since we were all family here. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. He began stumbling through an explanation about misunderstandings and jokes that went too far. His voice cracked slightly as he asked if I was really going to leave him hanging over a simple mistake. The planner checked her watch and mentioned that the venue needed resolution soon since they had another event booking the space. The pressure mounted as my nephew's celebration began dissolving into chaos around him. His friends started making excuses and checking their own phones, suddenly remembering other commitments. My sister tried to intervene, explaining to everyone that it was all just a big misunderstanding. She asked me to please help sort this out so the family could go back to celebrating. The word family hung in the air with new weight. I finished my drink and asked her to clarify which family she meant, since there seemed to be some confusion about my membership status. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in watching someone's world collapse in real time. My nephew called his parents, his grandparents, anyone who might be able to help with the sudden financial emergency. Each conversation ended with disappointment as relatives who had enthusiastically accepted their invitations suddenly discovered they were completely tapped out. His girlfriend suggested splitting the cost among all the guests, but the math was brutal. Even divided among the 30 attendees, each person would need to contribute over $140. The suggestion was met with uncomfortable silence and sudden interest in checking the time. As the restaurant staff began cleaning nearby tables and the planner's patience wore thin, my nephew made one final desperate play. He approached me again, this time with tears in his eyes, and apologized for what he called a stupid joke. He promised it would never happen again and begged me to help him avoid the humiliation of having his birthday celebration end in disaster. I listened to his entire speech without interrupting. When he finished, I stood up from my stool for the first time all evening. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as I considered his words. Then I told him I appreciated his apology, but I had learned an important lesson tonight about knowing where I stand with my actual family. The planner made one last attempt to find a solution, but the reality was clear. Without payment, the celebration was over. Security would need to be called if the balance remained unsettled. My nephew's face went ashen as he realized there was no way out of the hole he had dug for himself. I walked toward the exit, stopping only to tell my sister I hoped she enjoyed the rest of her evening with her actual family. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting as reality set in for everyone involved. The photographer packed up his equipment, the DJ began breaking down his setup, and guests started making hasty exits. The drive home was the quietest 20 minutes I'd experienced in years. No phone calls to coordinate family events, no texts about who was bringing what to the next gathering, no requests for help with various crises. Just silence and the growing realization that I had finally drawn a line I should have drawn years ago. Update 1. The fallout began the next morning. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. with calls from various family members who had heard different versions of what happened. My sister was the first to call, her voice a mixture of anger and desperation as she explained the mess I had left behind. Apparently, my nephew had spent the rest of the evening calling everyone he could think of, trying to raise the money. His parents had to put the balance on their credit card, money they didn't have, to avoid having their son arrested for theft of services. The restaurant had been understanding but firm. Someone was going to pay that bill before anyone left the building. My brother-in-law called an hour later with a different approach. He tried to frame the whole thing as a family emergency that required everyone to pull together. He explained that my nephew was young and stupid, that boys his age say things they don't mean, and that destroying his financial future over a moment of poor judgment seemed excessive. What bothered me most was that not one person who called seemed to understand why I was upset in the first place. They all focused on the money, the embarrassment, the inconvenience to the family gathering. Nobody mentioned the months of planning I had done, the phone calls with vendors, or the fact that I had been systematically excluded from my own nephew's celebration while secretly funding it. My mother called that afternoon with the guilt approach. She reminded me of all the times the family had been there for me, conveniently forgetting that most of those times involved me providing financial assistance rather than receiving it. She asked me to consider what my father would have thought about me abandoning family over money. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. For years, I had been the family's financial safety net. Every major celebration, every emergency, every opportunity for someone to avoid taking responsibility for their choices, somehow my checkbook became part of the solution. And now that I had finally said no, I was the villain in everyone's story. My nephew sent a series of increasingly desperate text messages throughout the week. The first few were attempts at apology mixed with justification. He explained that he had been trying to be funny, that everyone knew he didn't mean anything by it, and that I was overreacting to what was obviously a joke. When those messages didn't get a response, his tone shifted to anger. He accused me of being petty and vindictive, of using my money to control and manipulate the family. He pointed out that I had made my point and asked when I planned to stop punishing everyone for his mistake. The final messages were pure desperation. He explained that his parents were struggling with the unexpected debt, that the family was talking about uninviting me from future gatherings, and that my stubbornness was tearing everyone apart. He begged me to call him so we could work things out like adults. But the damage was already done, and not just the financial kind. Update 2. 3 weeks after the birthday disaster, I received an invitation to my cousin's wedding. The envelope was addressed properly. The invitation was beautifully designed, and tucked inside was a handwritten note asking if I would consider contributing to the reception costs since the family was still dealing with some financial strain. The request was phrased delicately, but the message was clear. I was still expected to be the family's financial backup plan, despite everything that had happened. The wedding was 2 months away, and the estimated cost of my expected contribution was outlined in detail. $3,000 to help cover venue, catering, and entertainment expenses. I called my cousin directly to clarify what was being asked of me. She seemed embarrassed, but explained that several family members had suggested reaching out to me since I usually helped with big celebrations. When I asked if my attendance was contingent on my financial contribution, there was a long pause before she assured me that everyone just wanted me there. The conversation revealed something I hadn't fully grasped before. My financial contributions had become so routine that they were factored into family event planning. People made decisions about venues, menus, and entertainment based partly on the assumption that Uncle would cover the difference between what they could afford and what they actually wanted. I declined to contribute to the wedding costs, but confirmed my attendance as a guest. My cousin seemed surprised but tried to hide her disappointment. She asked if I was still upset about the birthday party situation and whether that was affecting my decision. I explained that my choice had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with establishing healthy boundaries. The conversation ended cordially, but I could sense that my response had created a problem that would ripple through the family planning process. If they couldn't count on my contribution, they would need to scale back their plans or find alternative funding sources. 2 days later, my sister called with what she framed as a family meeting request. She wanted to get everyone together to discuss the ongoing situation and find a way to move forward that worked for everyone. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday dinner at my parents' house, and attendance was strongly encouraged for all family members. I agreed to attend, curious to see how the family planned to address the new reality. The meeting felt like an intervention, with everyone gathering in the living room after dinner while my mother served coffee and homemade cookies. The atmosphere was tense despite the familiar domestic setting. My brother-in-law opened the discussion by acknowledging that mistakes had been made at the birthday party. He explained that my nephew had learned his lesson and that holding grudges wasn't good for family unity. The focus, he suggested, should be on healing and moving forward rather than dwelling on past hurts. My sister took a different approach, explaining the financial strain the family was experiencing because of my changed behavior. She outlined several upcoming events, graduations, anniversaries, holidays, that would be significantly impacted if I continued my current stance. The implication was clear. My refusal to contribute was hurting everyone, not just my nephew. When it was my turn to speak, I explained that I wasn't punishing anyone or holding grudges. I was simply choosing to participate in family events as a family member rather than as a financial sponsor. If that meant smaller celebrations or different venues, those were choices the actual planners would need to make. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For years, I had been subsidizing a lifestyle that the family couldn't actually afford. My contributions had allowed them to host elaborate celebrations, eat at expensive restaurants, and maintain appearances that were beyond their actual means. My mother tried to mediate by suggesting a compromise where I could contribute smaller amounts to future events. She framed it as everyone doing their part to support the family, but the math didn't work. No one else was being asked to contribute thousands of dollars to celebrations they didn't plan and couldn't control. Update 3. The wedding became a test case for the family's new reality. Without my financial contribution, My cousin had to make difficult choices about her celebration. The venue was downgraded, the catering menu simplified, and several expensive elements were eliminated entirely. The wedding was still beautiful, but it was clearly not the event she had originally envisioned. During the reception, I noticed how differently I was treated by various family members. Some seemed resentful, as if my presence reminded them of what could have been if I had been more cooperative. Others were overly friendly, perhaps hoping to rebuild the relationship that had funded so many previous celebrations. My nephew avoided me for most of the evening, but toward the end of the night, he approached with what seemed like genuine remorse. He apologized again for his behavior at his birthday party and admitted that he had never fully understood how much I did for the family until it stopped. His apology felt more mature than his previous attempts, focused on his actions rather than my reaction. I accepted his apology, but explained that our relationship moving forward would be different. I would always be his uncle and would always love him, but I wouldn't be returning to my role as the family's financial safety net. He seemed to understand and asked if we could start building something new rather than trying to restore what we had before. The conversation felt like a genuine breakthrough, but it also highlighted how much damage had been done to family relationships by the unspoken financial arrangements that had governed our interactions for years. Trust had been broken on both sides, and rebuilding would require everyone to learn new ways of connecting. As the wedding wound down, I reflected on how much had changed since that night at the restaurant. The family gatherings were smaller now, more modest, but they also felt more authentic. People attended because they wanted to be together, not because someone else was picking up the tab for an elaborate celebration. My relationship with money had changed too. Instead of using my financial resources to maintain family connections, I was learning to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was harder work in some ways, but it felt infinitely more sustainable. The drive home from the wedding was peaceful in a way that surprised me. For the first time in years, I wasn't mentally calculating costs or planning my next contribution to someone else's celebration. I was just a family member who had attended a wedding, enjoyed seeing relatives, and was heading home with no financial obligations hanging over my head. 6 months after the birthday party incident, I can honestly say that setting boundaries was one of the best decisions I ever made. The family relationships are healthier now, even if they're sometimes more complicated. People know where they stand with me, and I know where I stand with them. My nephew has started paying his own way to family events and even picked up the check at a recent dinner. My sister has learned to plan celebrations within her actual budget, and I've discovered that being loved for who I am rather than what I can provide feels infinitely better than being the family's default financial solution. The stool by the restroom taught me something valuable about my worth and my place in the family. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop giving everything away.